Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Alhamdulillah, we meet again on the air in the program Man and Nature. And as mentioned in the previous episodes, the primary focus of this season's Man and Nature is on managing disasters. Last week, we were with Dr. Kamaru Azhari Razak, Director, Disaster Preparedness and Prevention Center, or DPPC, at the Malaysia-Japan International Institute of Technology, MJIIT, University Technology Malaysia, UTM. Our guest last week spoke on the topic 5 strategies to build a culture of resilience. And to recap the 5 strategies before we start our program today, the 5 strategies are the first is to invest in technologies based on risk assessment. Second, to invest in local risk governance. Third, to invest in risk communication. Fourth, to invest in risk across sectors, namely public, private, academia, and civil society. And finally, to build a culture of resilience. And to carry on our discussion on disasters this week, Alhamdulillah, we are fortunate to have our special guests from UTM as well, namely Dr. Wan Nurul Mardiyah binti Wan Muhammad Rani, who is Deputy Director 2, Institute Sultan Iskandar at UTM. Dr. Wan Nurul Mardiyah holds a PhD from Heriot Watt University in Edinburgh, Scotland, in the field of urban studies. And our topic of discussion with Dr. Wan Nurul Mardiyah today is challenges of fostering risk-informed urban development. First and foremost, Assalamualaikum, Dr. Nurul.
Waalaikumsalam, Dr. Syaif Saifuddin.
Thank you for agreeing to be our guest in Man and Nature today.
My honor. It's my pleasure, basically.
Right. Perhaps to start off our discussion, could you share with us the current scenario of Malaysian urban development and highlight how this affects the environment?
Okay, basically, that's a very good question for the introduction for today's session. Well, basically, as we all know that Malaysia is a fast-growing country, and cities like Kuala Lumpur, Johor Bahru, Penang are developing very rapidly. And as well as we can see that there's a rapid increase as well on the urban population as people from the rural migrates to these big cities to get more to get better quality of life, to get better to be better off financially as well for their to seek for job opportunities. So in this context, to accommodate the growing population, the boundary of the urban areas have shifted further away from the original boundary, and which have caused urban sprawl. So basically, this has been the way cities have evolved over time. And basically, urban sprawl is when happens when the migration of population from the rural areas to the urban areas, and the end result is that the spreading of the city has become more wider, and this as well has have lots of effects. Negative effects and also positive as well. Okay. However, due to this, there's some effects that we need to highlight in the context of in the environmental impacts, in which some of these new developments have encroached the environmentally sensitive areas, in which it have basically change how the natural environment would behave. And unfortunately, these have basically increased the disaster risk of the areas as well. So I would say that if we do not do something about this, we do not have any intervention to undo what we have done, the way that we're not supposed to do, it will impose more damage to our environment, basically.
Right. Now, Dr. Nurul, our topic touches on risk-informed urban development, and I'm quite sure this phrase may not be familiar to many people. Now, perhaps you'd like to explain, for the benefit of our listeners especially, what is the concept of risk-informed urban development?
Risk-informed urban development is basically an urban planning approach, it's an urban development approach in which it is becoming it is something which is more innovative, in which the process involve risk-based decision process that enables understanding of multiple concurrent threats and also complex risks to and also from the arising development decisions. And we as the stakeholders involved in the urban development process, uh, we are responsible to act upon the knowledge that we have from the understanding of the risk. So in which, as I mentioned, risk-informed urban development is an innovative planning approach that can transform the way cities are built in order to face the uncertainties that arise from specifically from the climate-induced disaster risk. So in this context, we need to understand that there is the potential to initiate this such in transformative approach, which we need to understand that such approach can also be referred as evidence-based planning, and also as we understand the risk, we need to act upon it, and we need to ensure that our actions are being considered on the potential impacts that it will bring later in the future. So basically, the process involves a lot of understanding of the scientific evidence that happened previously. We need to understand the historical trend that has happened before. We need to understand the what's going on um, in terms of the technical aspect. For example, the geo risk that would impose because of such actions that we have done on the changes. For example, the changes of the land use, changes of activities on the ground.
Right. Now you mentioned when you're explaining about risk-informed urban development that this is a process or an innovation that is based on evidence. And I think this has to do, among other things, there is a relationship between the risk and also the development taking place. Now, could you please elaborate on this further? That is the relationship between risk and development, as well as the main rationale for integrating risk reduction into the process of urban development.
Okay, here I believe that first we need to understand on the function of the city itself, in which a city is basically a space in which people do economic activities. A place to live, work, and basically play. That is the concept of livability. And in this context, as we live and as we do lots of activities in the cities is where our actions would have consequences. For example, as we develop cities, we also have actually intrude the way the natural environment works. So in this case, the relationship between risk and the development works in both ways and forms the core rationale for integrating the risk reduction into the development policy, development planning, and also in terms of we planned, as you mentioned, the five key takeaway message from the previous session, which is investing into the risk reduction measures. So in this case, as we look into the rationale, the need for the risk-informed urban development emerge as our cities need to adapt to the climate change and also the increasing number of extreme weather events that have happened recently. As we face since December 2021, we face a lot of not only that, basically back to its 2014 where the big flood happened in Kelantan. So basically, it has changed a lot of, the way we think, the way we plan cities have changed tremendously. And this is a very good sign in which we have already looked into understanding the risk and how we need to further look into these concept of risk-informed urban development to ensure that we will manage to increase the resiliency of cities in order for us to move forward and ensure that our cities would adapt nicely to the future risks. I mean, we as well as the local population that lives within um, big cities, for example, me in Kuala Lumpur, um, we need to be adapt to the consequences that might happen, and also understanding our role, changing our lifestyle, for example. I mean, there's lots of our doings that have actually impacted the way climate change impacted us as well. So it works both ways. So we need to understand that the development and also the risk works in both ways. And the rationale here is very clear that the way to move forward right now is only by understanding the risks, and we plan according to our understanding on how these risks, evolve eventually.
Dr. Nora, I like what you said earlier that our actions have consequences. This actually reminds me of how things were with our grandfathers and great grandfathers, when they build houses, for example, they take into account the environment. Whereas today, when we talk about development, this seems to be absent. Now, is there a specific process for us to achieve risk-informed urban development, and who might be the stakeholders involved?
Okay. Well, actually, the process of achieving a risk-informed urban development is basically the action um, of the stakeholders and on mainstreaming the element of risk into the development documents, for example. So in this case, the conventional urban development process mainly involves the implementation of strategic policies established at the various level of governance. So in Malaysia specifically, we have the three-tier governance system, the federal level, the state, and also the local level. So in this case, um, in Malaysia, it is already evident that we are already integrating the elements of risk into the development document. So particularly the local plan document, which is established and documented at the local level, and here the local plan is seen a very strategic platform to mainstream DRR and also the climate change adaptation strategies. So here, it is Plan Malaysia. Plan Malaysia, basically the government agency that spur the national physical planning through the implementation and monitoring of comprehensive, systematic, and also innovative development planning for the well-being of the society. Okay, basically, Plan Malaysia recently issued a guide to detail out the implementation of mainstreaming aspects of disaster risk management in the preparation of local plan document. So basically, this this document basically have spelled out very comprehensively on how we can foster risk-informed urban development into the urban development processes. So in this case, it is also clear that the stakeholders involve various stakeholders from the government, which is national, local, and also interest groups such as the NGOs, the committees, organizations, humanitarian agencies, as well as private and also public organizations, and not to forget university, higher education institution as well, and researchers, and also the communities. So right now, even in the document, it has spelled out that community-based disaster risk management is a very important process to be integrated in fostering risk-informed urban development, because these local people understand better the sites, basically what they face during the disasters. I mean, they also understand what they can do to adapt and also prepare for the future disaster that might happen. And also they also understand on what are the natural warning system. Basically, they do have that some sort of knowledge, but at certain times they were not sure whether that is something good, or is it just something, I mean, it's because it's their normal routine that they understand. If this happens, it means that something bad is going to happen. So at certain times they were not quite sure, but through the intervention of the process of the CBDRM, community-based disaster risk management, we have clarified with them that that is something important, and it's one of the key information that we need to know as experts, as players that try to advocate uh, community resilience, and also improve the resiliency of the areas as well. So the process is very agile, and it is very localized, in which different site would inquire different approach, and different community need to be approached differently depending on what kind of, for example, education level that we are dealing with, the population group, and things like that.
In essence, what you are saying is basically part of local risk governance, whereby we empower the local people as well to contribute towards managing risk that they face with regards to disasters. Dr. Nurul, could you share with our listeners the importance of fostering risk-informed urban development, in particular in Malaysian cities?
Well, basically, right now, the climate change impacts I mean, the global warming that we face right now is very much evident, that has become more evident, and it's becoming more clear. And even we expect the unexpected has happened, basically, and the big flood have happened, and we don't know what's next. So basically, when we have all this risk being informed earlier, we will manage to be more prepared, and basically, in which we do not want to face any more, I mean, damages. Of course, regardless, we will face some damage, but we don't want it to be the we don't want to face such a big loss in future. So in this case, it is very important that we need to consider all the risk in order to do the investment right now, in order for us to experience a minimal loss in future when any disaster strikes. So in this case, um, as we are moving forward, the importance of increasing our city resilience, community resilience, have becoming more. Um, you have to put it as a priority right now, and even it is our urban development. We need to ensure that we do not do any more damage to the natural environment, in which basically, whatever we do, we need to understand the impact of our actions, and specifically on the environmental damage that will happen if we go beyond what we were supposed to do, basically.
Right. So, what are the challenges that we face in fostering, or as you said earlier, mainstreaming risk-informed urban development process?
Well, basically, I would say that there are basically six challenges that we can highlight here, because basically this is from the research that we are currently involved in which the first is the institutional challenges. So basically, when we talk about institution, we are currently looking into the weakness or the limitation of the predominance of the conventional top-down approach, in which at certain point, we were also facing a weak institutional coordination between agencies, in which we were working in silos. Even though we have all the information, even though we have all the data that we need to plan according to understanding the risks involved within a particular site. However, the week of communication have failed the whole system basically. It is not as transparent or as we expected. So hence, in this case, we are looking into the only way for us to move forward is to overcome the challenge of this. I mean, working in silos, the institutional challenge that we face. Next is on the knowledge and capacity. So I would say that I think, however, we have some sort of move forward from the limitation in knowledge and capacity since we have all these programs, seminars, webinars, trainings, in which knowledge in the, for example, in the measures to mainstream, and also knowledge on the capacity and the capacity on the policies in the climate change adaptation and also the disaster risk reduction have eventually being regarded as one of the challenge that we face right now. So at this point, I would say that Malaysia also is looking into advocating this the concept of CCE and DRR in various platforms. So I would say, even though it is seen as a challenge, but Malaysia, I would say we are progressing okay in advocating this aspect. So even though it haven't reached all the level of the society yet, but at least we can see that due to the events that has happened, everybody is already aware on what to do and what not to do. Even during the monsoon season recently, we can see there's billboard, there's TV ads, radio ads about what we need to do in dealing with the risk of flooding happening in our areas. So third is when we talk about equity policies. So in this context, we are looking more on the socially vulnerable population in areas exposed to disasters. So in this case, socially vulnerable population in areas exposed to disasters are not receiving enough attention. For example, in Kelantan, again, it's Kelantan. Okay, even though we know that they are experiencing with flood every year, and we were also told that they are resilient in dealing with flood. Actually, um, even though we were told that, but still we feel that we haven't done enough for them. So we need to engage them better in order to ensure that our policies are reached out and are implemented throughout the whole nation without having um, any uh, any exclusion in any areas as well. So here, it is very important to consider socially vulnerable as an integral part of the planning process that accounts for equity policies. And then the fourth one, I would say the policy trade-off. So trade-off here in this context is we are looking into the trade-offs in development policy and decision making, basically largely fail to prioritize actions that are critical for DRR. In this case, we would say that some policies are addressing the benefit of one aspect, and the other aspect is um, we are substituting for something else. For example, when we look into economic growth, for example, we build skyscrapers, we build offices. However, that is for the economic development, but it is basically a trade-off. We are trading something else, which is our natural environment. So we need to have a balance in this, in which in the end we need to understand back what is sustainable development. So I believe that everybody knows already what is sustainable development. Okay, we need to compromise and also seek balance between economic, social, and also environmental development. Okay, I would say the fifth one is the lack of evidence support for policymaking. Right now, I would say we are trying. Okay, Malaysia, I can say that we are looking forward to improving our evidence-based support, in which me as an urban planner, I would say that um, in the process of the urban development process, we try our best to ensure that all our decisions, all our strategies are evidence-based. We make sure that it is from the right source. We make sure that it is from um, it is contextual, and it is factual, and we need to ensure that we need to also ensure that we integrate the knowledge from the community as well, from the public participation. And also in this aspect, we see that evidence-based support with the inclusion of public perspective are not brought into the discussion for the decision making process. So in this case, we try our best to always include public into the decision making process and ensure that this evidence based policy making will be further strengthened throughout the whole process as well. And finally, I would see that in terms of the whole governance, the general governance, so in which weak and complex governance system may lead to conflicts over priority setting in policy development. This is also related to the trade-off policy just now, in which weak in the governance will lead to we trading off the wrong, actions, wrong strategies in this case. So, in addressing the disaster challenges, a new approach to govern and also embrace more collaborative should be more flexible and more adaptive to move forward with risk-informed urban development.
Okay. Doctor, since we are facing an urgent need to be more resilient in dealing with future risks, perhaps my final question is, could you kindly share with us the key strategies to overcome the challenges?
Okay, based on our study, we have identified, basically, I will highlight two key strategies, which is first, adaptive governance in planning policymaking, in which adaptive governance has been identified as an approach to transform the relationship between development and also disaster risk. In this case, we look into an approach that promotes cross-organizational cooperation, collaboration, power sharing, increase in public participation in different level of the development process, transparency, accountability, learning, and also adaptability. And also, it is very important for us to address wicked and complex problems. So, in which collaborative governance itself is not adequate. However, we need to look into more adaptive and more flexible to deal with the challenges and the conflicts. And also, it is also important to highlight agile policymaking, which is the second key strategy. So, agile approach supports adaptive governance due to its flexibility in responding to the changes. In which we need to understand what the concept of agile, in which the concept of agile aims to change the practice in which policies are developed, and also to adequately respond to complex urban development and challenges. So in this case, we also need to see that as we need collaboration from different stakeholders, we need the inputs from multi-stakeholders and also partnership. We need to be flexible, we need to be agile in cooperating all this information, and to make sure that our future urban development would be more holistic and more flexible in dealing with the future risks that we face.
Right. Thank you, Dr. Nurul. We actually have come to the end of our program. How fast time flies actually when we are learning something new, like the topic that we discussed in this episode. Alhamdulillah, our guest, Dr. Wan Nurul Mardia, has shared with us many new and useful information regarding risk-informed urban development. To recap, she listed down six challenges. Number one, institutional challenges. Number two, knowledge and capacity. Number three, equity policies. Number four, policy trade-off. Number five, lack of evidence support for policy making. And number six, weak and complex governance. So these are the six challenges that we face. And she also proposed or shared with us two key strategies, namely adaptive governance and also agile policy making. Now, I'd like to share also the view of the esteemed scholar Ismail Al-Faruqi, in which he said that nature is not man's property but belongs to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And like a good land tenant, man ought to take care of his master's property. The right to utilize nature does not entitle mankind to destroy nature, or to so exploit it will upset and ruin its ecological balance. As Khalifa or steward of the earth, man is supposed to hand over his trust to Allah in a better state than it was when he receives it. Now, to pick up what Al-Faruqi said and to link this to what was shared by Dr. Nurul, it is important, I think, that in developing our cities, we all of us should be risk informed so as to ensure that we do not simply exploit nature when we carry out development, but more importantly, ensure that nature is looked after when development takes place. On that note, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to record my sincerest gratitude to our guest, Dr. Wan Nurul Mardiah binti Wan Muhammad Rani, Deputy Director 2, Institute Sultan Iskandar UTM, for being able to join us in this week's Man and Nature. Inshallah, our discussion today has been very beneficial to everyone listening, either on Radio IKIM or on IKIM FM's Facebook page. Please share and forward this discussion with everyone so that the benefits can be more widespread, inshallah. Thank you again, Dr. Nurul, for coming on to this program this week. That's all the time that we have for in this edition of Man and Nature. Next week, we will continue with our discussion on managing disasters with another special guest. To find out more, stay tuned to Man and Nature at the same time next week. Wabillahi taufiq wal hidayah. Wassalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.